Okay. All right, everyone. Welcome. Go ahead and, if you're in the room tonight, go ahead and say hello. Introduce yourself if you're here. If anyone is here. Was anyone new tonight? Welcome. Dominique, are you new to the space? Dominique, greetings. Okay. Okay, you don't have to be new to say hello. I would like, it's nice to see who's new in the space. Let's see. Well, in any case, everyone, welcome. We're just gonna give it just a few more minutes to let people just take their time in signing in and getting into the space tonight. We can also do check-ins in the chat as well if people want to just say how they're doing or something that's up for you. Someone's new. Kim is new. Welcome, Kim. Yeah. Sarah Leg from Toronto. Yeah. I am, of course, here on Muskogee Land Creek in Cherokee Land, here in Atlanta. Shout out to everyone else is here in Atlanta with all the rain that we've been getting. It's hard to go outside. Some of us melt when we get wet. Some of us melt in the rain because we're so sweet. We're made out of sugar. So it's dangerous to go outside. So I have to kind of settle it down here. Yeah. So, again, welcome to everyone who's signing in, getting into the space. So if you're new, I am Lama Rod. So it's so good to have you here with us tonight. I feel a little compelled tonight to just continue the discussion from Monday night from our Medicine Buddha group space, which I've been thinking about, still reflecting on everything that we kind of talked about. And as I, start going through things, always feel free to start adding questions to the ask a question um, box down at the bottom of your screen too. And so we're gonna like questions, just kind of start coming together there. um, yeah, on Monday night I talked um, about these kind of three principles or three aspects. I don't know. I don't even know what I called it, but I think these three practices or qualities of, I think, moving into a deeper relationship to ourselves, to the deity, to the phenomenal world around us. And those three things, well, they were these things that led to something else. So the first of these things was prayer. And then prayer led to the second quality, which was vulnerability. Um, no, it was openness and vulnerability. Of course, that openness and vulnerability leads to um, this last quality, which is that of surrender. How do we get to this place of a deep kind of vulnerability and surrendering um, to into the practice or into a relationship with the focus of the practice, which in tantric traditions, a lot of our focus is on practicing with and venerating the conscious energy of a teacher or that of a deity. So, been thinking a little bit, actually quite a bit about that this week, and just coming back to re-emphasizing, I think, the importance of prayer in the tradition. I know many of us come from so many different places, and I think one of the things that we have to do is to do this labor of kind of reimagining, re re-informing ourselves of some of these things that maybe we grew up with in our roots, spiritual, religious traditions that we felt disconnected from. But coming into a new practice like this, having to do this work of saying, what, prayer has to be different, or this idea of worship, and devotion has to be different now. To reimagine that in our own terms for our own needs. To move deeper into, for instance, a practice like prayer, and to ask, okay, what am I actually doing here? Like, what's really happening when I pray? What is the kind of, what is this act of articulating needs and wants, and how does that lead into a deeper experience of something that feels other than myself or more divine or more sacred? Moving deeper into what I need for myself and what I need for those around me, what I need for the world, right? And to let the heart open in that process of naming what I most want to see for myself and the world. And prayer doesn't have to be this virtuous activity. Prayer, prayer can be used to hurt, to harm. As we know, prayer is the driving energy of a lot of ritual and ceremony. Particularly like indigenous, kind of indigenous land-based um, traditions, like Tantra. Tantra, I believe, is a land base. And what I mean by land base is that, yeah, there's a relationship to the earth and all elements, but it's also a relationship to culture of a land, culture of a particular um, place that begins to inform um, the characteristics of that system of practice, you know. So land based means also the beings connected to that land, not just living beings, but also, um, I would say, formless beings, right? Spirits, deities, other kinds of energies. Um, so Tibetan Buddhism, for instance, has a particular quality that's based on the land of Tibet, the culture, the mythology, and history, right? And so when we look at traditional Tibetan practices, you see all these prayers, right? And all these supplications to deities and so forth that are connected to the land of Tibet. And for those of you who are coming out of Shambhala, you know that you have these prayers to local protectors associated with certain places in Tibet, right? You know, and then traditional Orthodox Tibetan practice, we're praying to these deities from another place, another land, right? Um, Not that deities and certain beings are not that they can't be, you know, trans global, right? Or global, because they can, absolutely. But when we start talking about what I call indigenous Dharma, which is a project that I'm working on, right, for my next book. When we talk about indigenous Dharma, we're talking about saying, okay, who are the beings associated with the land that I'm on, right? What are the energies, the particular spirits and so forth who are inhabiting the unseen world around me here, and how do I begin to develop a relationship to them? How do I supplicate those those beings in the same way that maybe for those of us coming out of more orthodox Tibetan practice have been supplicating Tibetan protectors and deities? And I'm not talking about the Buddhas and the Bodhisattvas, right? I'm talking about specific land, culture, region-based deities. Okay? Um, Beginning to invite those beings into our practice. And if you practice the seven homecomings, this is something that I kind of am supporting people in beginning to do, not so explicitly. I don't offer instructions as of yet to say, oh, okay, all the beings around you who are benevolent. I say specific beings like ancestors and Buddhas and saints and so forth, right? But eventually, what I want us to get into doing in our practice is to turn our minds to the reality of beings around us, connected to the land that we're part of. That kind of recognition of the land in that way will actually begin to invite us into a deeper relationship with the land around us. So we're getting into this practice of recognizing the land acknowledgement, right? Which I think is extremely important, to do this work, this labor of remembering, right? That we're living, on stolen, colonized land, taken from a culture of people who are already present, you know. Now, of course, right, for those of us who are descendant from the indigenous communities, cultures of the lands that we're a part of, of course, that's our people, so we feel a connection to the land. But, I know many people with stronger indigenous roots and ties to the land than I do, who don't feel as connected as well. So the ancestral indigeneity, that many of us have always been connected to, or are beginning to connect to. Like in my case, I'm just beginning to connect to my indigenous ancestry. I've been very connected to my African, Black, enslaved ancestry. But the practice that I'm talking about is much more than just saying, "Oh, I'm a descendant of indigenous people," or this land that I'm on it belonged to this particular community, a nation of people. But what we're being called to is a deeper connecting to the consciousness of the land and the being still connected to this land, and to enter into an allyship with the land, with the earth, right? To begin to connect to the energetic consciousness of the earth, and in doing so, beginning to develop a sensitivity to the energies attached to the energetic consciousness of the earth, right? One of the kind of aspects of indigenous Dharma that I've been reflecting on is the remembrance that the phenomenal world is conscious. Like there's a consciousness, there's a activity, there's a living, not a living, I don't want to say living. There's a consciousness, there's a knowingness, right? There's an awakenedness related to the phenomenal world, right? So an object isn't just an object, right? An object can be conscious, can be aware, including the land, including the elements, right? Including plants, not just living beings like, organic living, beings like, animals. And of course, humans are animals, right? The humans and animals and other, species of beings that some of us may or may not believe in, that are actually like living organic creatures. But, it's, again, it's everything. Tree, plants, tree is a plant, but stones, right? The earth, mountains, wind can be conscious, right? Fire is conscious. I think we talked a little bit about this in my last Wednesday talk 2 weeks ago, but like how, and once in some talk, either in Medicine Buddha or Wednesday night, where we talked about how there can be physical objects that we have that are touchstones for other beings as well. Other beings who are able to touch into the world to maybe harm or to benefit us through particular objects that we have around our home, or things that we carry with us. And I did give you an assignment, for those of you who remember, that to start reflecting on things that you have that are always with you. Like, there are things that like you would never leave the house without. I'm not talking about just wallet or money and cell phone or keys, but there are other things that maybe there's like some object, that you're like, okay, I feel safer, I feel better when I have this, when I leave the house. And I have several of those kinds of objects, right? I've also had sacred objects given to me that have just disappeared as well. I can't explain it. They just kind of like left. That's also the nature of a conscious object, is that it has a certain agency and that it will make decisions. For a lot of folks, our stones, our sacred precious stones, our crystals, and different rocks and minerals and so forth. Those we know those objects to be quite conscious. And I have stones everywhere in my practice space. I have a lot of clear stones. I have a lot of like very clear kind of stones, crystals around me, because they act as they conduct energy really well. That really like energy moving through my space. Or when I'm doing practice and I need to really just kind of become a little more fluid in my practice, I hold stones. So when I'm doing a practice, when I begin to do a practice, sometimes you'll see me reach for stuff. I'm always reaching for a stone that can support me during the practice. But my stones are really conscious. Like they know when I reach for something, because I get a sense that that stone is being asked to be in relationship. Or stones, my stones will ask to be recharged, or to be, to be kind of cleansed or purified in various ways. So I can sense that, I can feel that, as well. And there are other objects, not just stones, but there are many other objects that become conscious for us as well. But anywho, all this, is getting back to how do we develop a relationship to this kind of world around us, through this kind of prayer. Through prayer, through basically just opening our minds and prayer. Of course, prayer isn't, always to a particular, thing, but prayer can just be this way in which we're just like allowing space to hold some of our needs and wants and frustrations or whatever. Sometimes for me, prayer is just going through the process of seeing and naming things in my experience, right? Seeing those things happening in my experience, and then just allow myself to experience, to feel, to move from this analytical, conceptual mind, this thinking mind, into a feeling experience, being with sensations, being with energy, just a being with, and that can be prayer as well. We may call that meditation, but that's also, meditation can be a form of prayer. Prayer can be a form of meditation. When you get into more tantric, indigenous, land-based practices, we begin to understand that prayer is something that is often happening, in the practice. That prayer opens us up to, of course, this vulnerability. That vulnerability is really about telling the truth, because prayer can help us enter into a truth telling, and that truth can be something that we sit in and experience. That just telling things as they are in the moment, for ourselves, for others. It doesn't always mean that we're right, but it means that there's a willingness to try to tell the truth in that moment. That's the kind of openness that we can enter into. Now, this process of prayer vulnerability openness is how we also, for me, this is the basic practice of how we can experience a fluidity into different states of consciousness from this particular tradition of Tantra, you know, traditions, right? It's that openness of vulnerability is how we let go, you know, and enter into different ways of experiencing and being, right? Um, and to move into these places, by starting from this moment, this place of prayer, even though it creates this vulnerability, is also a way that we can also ask for the help and the support to do different kinds of mental, spiritual practices involving the mind, as well involving any ritual, really. That prayer sets the tone, that prayer asks for help, right? Um, I think it's a good idea for many of us um, who feel a little more fluid in our practice. Like when we sit and do practice, our minds, our attentions, we start what I would say is traveling, right? You start moving into different expressions of thoughts and different narratives. So it's actually just more than that. It's like it's a kind of a connection to other more expansive expressions of reality. You know, some of you are clairvoyant, right? Or some of you are telepathic, some of you are mediums, you know, psychics, intuitives, what have you. You know, um, I've met people over the years who, you know, these abilities are things that are beginning to awaken, and they feel really like they feel like they have no agency when these experiences begin to awaken these abilities. You know, and I say that I think prayer has to become a foundation, a prayer that helps us to connect to the resources, the help, the support of beings and other energies around us. We call those beings into relationship to be of help. This is again one of the reasons, you know, of the the seven homecomings practice, right? Is to let's start consciously calling in beneficial energy to take care of us and to hold us as we move into different expressions of our non-linear nature. There are beings who are there to help support us as we move through different experiences. You know, and it's not just meditative experiences, but any experience in life. Just opening and saying, okay, whatever help is around me, I ask for that. I ask for support, you know, and so forth. So, you know, of course, you know, when we start connecting to the energies around the earth or connected to the earth, we also come into um, issues of how to sustain our relationship to beings, energies around us, you know, which we see if you're coming out of more traditional Tibetan practice or Tantra practice. There's always ritual and offering when we connect to certain beings. When you enter into initiation into certain paths, that initiation to certain paths related to certain deities and certain traditions, when you're initiated into those traditions, there's a balance that has to be maintained in that relationship. So there are just basically offerings, right? That we are forms of worship that maintains that relationship to that particular deity or being or energy, right? And that's different across traditions, across paths, and so forth. You know, so it's not just acknowledging the beings around us, but it's also asking us to enter into a mutually beneficial relationship with beings around us, but also I would say with the phenomenal world in general. I know this mutual benefit relationship sounds, real sexy. It sounds real hot. Um, I guess it can be, but it's entering into this acknowledgement that that there are beings around us who are doing certain labor for us, and we ask, okay, how can we support that labor? How do we remember that there's labor being done, and how do we create symbols to acknowledge that labor and maybe to support that labor being done for us? I remember I lived in monastery, and my root teacher was very, very sensitive to the history and power of indigenous native communities, and was very aware as an immigrant, right, as a Tibetan immigrant, was very aware that because of colonialism and the genocide, of indigenous communities, that there were beings, deities, gods, right, goddesses, that were left without this support, ritual support. And so part of what we did at the monastery was to try to maintain that ritual support. So we weren't just trying to venerate the beings within the Tibetan pantheon, but we were also trying to understand the pantheon of deities associated with the land that the monastery, had occupied now. And of course, this is up in the Hudson Valley in New York. But my teacher was always deeply respectful and sensitive to the history of indigenous Native Americans. And those were Wappinger people. A Wappinger tribe, people, nation, where we were, up in that part of New York, where we were actually in Wappinger Falls, New York. And that was, of course, the name of the people who were still there, And so that's another part of when we're doing this work, like this kind of land recognition and thinking about indigeneity, if we are indigenous and our ancestors are indigenous to the land that we're living on, we're still there, in that way, right? Like people are still present on the land, and that's that also that recognition that there are continuing to be stewards, living, present stewards on the land, that like indigenous communities are not something in the past. They're people living in the present. Some of us are those people, right? We're living in the present, in this moment, and we're still connected to the land that our ancestors took care of, and that we're still here and connected. And so, I think another question, that we begin to look at is to say, okay, how can I actually become an active ally and steward of the land along with the indigenous community that, may still be present, stewarding the land. Like, how do we become a part of that particular work as well? Not just acknowledging, but becoming a part of that work. And of course, part of that work is connecting energetically to the land and supporting the unseen beings and connected to the land. I know for those of you, I know for some of you in this space who I've talked to before about this work, some of you actually don't. Um, get it? Well, you don't necessarily get a choice as to what you're connecting to because things just happen, things just come, and you're kind of left having to make sense of it and having to do that work. And over time, that becomes a lot easier, as well. Like it, I'm someone who, for me, since my earliest memories, I have always found the world to be full of mystery, unseen beings. Um, I guess in a way, I've always seen the world as sacred. And when I say sacred in this way, I guess when I was younger, sacred meant that the world was much fuller than my senses were willing to admit or let on. I could just feel that there was more happening. And that's what I meant by sacred growing up, And what I mean by sacred now is, of course, informed by tantric practice, which is to say that, yeah, all phenomena is an expression of the dream, of this illusion of emptiness and energy and space, right? So inherently, all phenomena is inherently this expression of, I would say, purity. This expression of, the essence of everything is liberation. It's liberated. Everything's already liberated. There's nothing that we need to do to liberate anything except for us to remember that we are liberated. Like that we're already abiding in this freedom, but we're having to do this labor, however, to come back into relationship with the essence of everything. And that's the sacredness. But there's a essence of emptiness, space, where everything is already free, right? And so everything's already liberated. So the essence of everything is liberation itself. And I've said this many times, but when we start developing a connection to that kind of realization, right? When we start having those realizations of the nature of things, that offers us the space to be in the world and not to necessarily always be overwhelmed by the world. We're overwhelmed by the world when we begin to have this experience of the hyper materialism of the world, the hyper realness of the world. Like when something becomes super, super real, it's no longer so fluid anymore. There are no more options to make it different than what it is. But when we start connecting to these teachings around the essence of everything, emptiness, right? And not nihilistic emptiness, right? Because it's not about extremism. The path of liberation isn't through extremism, it's through the middle way, right? So Buddha, like Buddhist Tantra or Buddha Dharma or Buddhism in general, is this path of the middle way. Taranatha, for instance. No, it wasn't. I think it was Taranatha. Who talked about the middle way, the philosophy of the middle way, But it's coming into the middle and saying, yeah, it's everything, right? The path of liberation is about bringing everything together, right? And not even moving forward or up or down. It's just like coming together and saying, oh, this is what freedom is. When I realize the nature of things, I'm freed in the moment in the place where I have felt occupied or felt rooted. I'm freed in that moment where I realize that this rootedness is just a dream. It's the dream, it's the great dream, right? Of course, when I realize that completely, that's enlightenment, right? That's awakening. But if I can realize even just a piece of that, like a half of 1% is enough to feel a lot of freedom in this realm. To say that, oh, okay, there is this experience of freedom, openness, emptiness, and that offers me enough space to move through the world without being overwhelmed by the intensity of this perceived realness or hyper materialism. Without that kind of realization, is really difficult for us to feel any kind of just spaciousness, maybe, but without that work of connecting to the essence of things, right? It's hard for us to feel like we have agency. It's hard for us to experience fluidity and movement. It's hard for us to, as I say all the time, in the tradition of Majaya, that it's hard for us to consume the chaos. This recognition of emptiness, or a connection to emptiness, is what helps us to consume the chaos that we're moving through, and not let the chaos consume us. The chaos can't consume us, right? Because the chaos is an expression of this emptiness, and this emptiness is the same expression of our mind. So we begin to say, oh, this dream, I'm the one who's dreaming this dream, right? Like, I'm dreaming here. This is straight out of, Tibetan Buddhist philosophy. Like, this is a dream. This is why we have dream yoga as one of the 6 yogas of Naropa. The 6 yoga system in general, there are different, these yoga systems can be applied to different great masters, but in general, there's this basic yoga system that's meditation, it's movement, it's asana, it's ritual, ceremony, breath, and these are the 6 yogas. But one of those yogas are dream, and yoga is about, again, yoga means union, bringing together, right? But I think more specifically, yoga and a yoga system and Tibetan practice is really about clarification. It's about getting clear that there is no separation to begin with. So it's a remembrance that there's a wholeness, right? And so in dream yoga, we're remembering that when we go to sleep and have dreams, it's no different than being awake and moving through this larger dream. There's no difference. The dream of sleep and the dream of life is the same dream, right? If we can see that, then we say, oh, okay, if this is a dream, then there's an ultimate reality to all of this, right? That recognition of the emptiness, too, is also what drives our development of compassion, right? It's compassion ultimately, like the ultimate understanding of compassion is really about the recognition of emptiness. And that recognition of emptiness, the recognition of the dream, and realizing, oh, like we're walking through this experience that we don't have to actually be walking through or moving through. And I get a little bit of that now, but there are so many beings who don't get that. So they're having these issues in this dream. And same with, I continue, right, to have these issues in the dream, but I have a little more awareness now. That little added piece of awareness helps me to experience much more freedom, to be happy, to avoid suffering, right, and to do the necessary labor to transcend this unconsensual cycle of birth and rebirth. So I'm getting that. And so I feel, because of that recognition, I feel aligned with the suffering of beings who are lost, still struggling in this dream. Like, I get what it means to wander through the dream without recognition. And so from that kind of clarity that's being developed, along with this empathy and compassion, begins to kind of come into conversation, and that creates the experience of bodhicitta. Bodhicitta is really the wish for beings to be free, and that we're going to do everything that we can to free beings. Bodhicitta begins to disrupt our complacency in the dream, right? Like, bodhicitta begins to wake us up, and bodhicitta is a force. It's a force. We can see it as a weapon. It can be, like a spear. Like, I have a new friend and colleague, Robin Costa Lewis, who's really amazing American poet. She won the National Book Award. I forget when, but just she's award-winning poet. We were on this program, panel online a couple of days ago. It was Tuesday. It was Tuesday days. Yeah, it was yesterday. So it was yesterday, and she talked about love being, to weaponize love in a way, to see it as a force, not to see it as something that's supposed to feel good, but we use it to free ourselves and to free others. And I really enjoyed that languaging, because I do see the time that we're in as spiritual warfare. This is a moment of spiritual warfare. Yeah, it's yes, physical wars and all kinds of political and unrest, but there's also an intense spiritual warfare that is this kind of fight for balance between what's conducive to freedom and what isn't conducive to freedom. Really the struggle between light and dark. That grand, ancient, archetypal struggle, which is real. It's real, and there's a balance to all of this. This realm, samsara. I think an underlying experience of samsara, or this kind of world of ignorance and delusion, or this experience of ignorance and delusion, which is what we call samsara, that this experience, there's a balancing to this experience. Now, this is like stuff that I'm just recently beginning to think a little more critically about. I think there's a balance. Like, when there's an experience of great virtue, I would say virtue or light, there's also a balancing experiences of great darkness. That everything is a balance, in this particular world, reality system, consciousness, whatever we want to call it, samsara. And that our practice is about we're choosing sides, really. We're choosing to be agents of clarity, wisdom, compassion, or we're choosing to be agents of delusion. Um, I think when we think that we're being neutral, when we think that we're not, we're neither good or bad, or we're just our default, or we say our default is goodness. I think when we're not actively choosing the practice of virtue, then we're actually choosing delusion. Like when we're not actively laboring to get clear and to develop care for ourselves and others, and we're not really, really actively, consciously doing that, I think that we're actually sliding deeper into the experience of delusion. Um, and in that space of delusion, of course, that's the opposite of clarity, wisdom, right? That's, when we begin to perpetuate delusion, everything connected to delusion, which is hate and violence. Um, so, of course, this brings me back, brings me back again to prayer. I hope this is making sense to, of course, we have questions we can ask as well if this isn't making sense. Um, this brings me back to prayer because prayer is, for me, a gateway into virtue. And no matter what we're experiencing, I think prayer becomes a tool for us to enter into something virtuous when we're like really trying to situate ourselves in bodhicitta. That virtue becomes really quite powerful. When I'm really trying to get clear, when I'm actively trying to get clear, when I'm really trying to care for myself and others and really want people to be free, right? That's all we all that's the only place we have to be. Really, like it's like you're when you like that bodhicitta, like that will do everything for us if we can just get there. If we can just practice that, practice caring, practice developing clarity. Like if we can just get there and stay there, everything else begins to reveal itself. I'm talking about the work that needs to be done. That just reveals itself. Bodhicitta will take us into the work to get free for ourselves, to get other people free, the other beings free. Right? The bodhicitta takes us into relationships with the unseen world as well. Bodhicitta is armor, is protection, right? It arms us, right, in this experience of spiritual warfare. I think that is one of the things that makes Buddha Dharma unique, right? Is this emphasis on this bodhicitta that we're doing this because we want not just to get free for ourselves, but we want everyone to get free. Everything. We want everything to be free. And that's an important philosophical expression of Buddha Dharma, is that everything, not just beings, everything is free. But we need to remember that. We have to come back into remembrance that everything's already liberated, right? And start functioning from that philosophical standpoint that, yeah, everything's already free. I'm already free. How would our lives change if we could center that perspective, that instead of coming from this place of feeling bound or enslaved are experiencing a loss of agency, how can we say, you know what, I have a lot of agency, like I'm already free? And how do I start living like that? You know, from a place of freedom, not from a place of being shut down or, bound. But in general, all tantric traditions are not bound or wrapped up in bodhicitta. You know, tantra doesn't express this inherent value of virtue. Which, let me just say that in a different way. Tantra doesn't mean good, right? Tantra doesn't mean light, and goodness and lollipops and rainbows, you know. Like, that's not. Tantra means system. It means this. Tantra means ecosystem. You know, this kind of interrelated experience that we can unravel into another experience. Um, so tantra doesn't necessarily mean it's all about good, because there are tantric practices. There are, there's for loss of a better phrase, I would say black magic, right? There's lots of black magic in tantra. It's actually, any practice that we do together, even our our Monday night practice. I mean, you can use that to hurt people. Absolutely. you know, um, we're always visualizing light and energy. Um, bright light and stuff like that. Well, you can just as easily imagine darkness and send darkness to people. You know, um, but again, coming back, bodhicitta is what actually safeguards those intentions. Like, if you do the work of cultivating bodhicitta will take care of that maliciousness that comes up in our practice, and it comes up for me, and too, absolutely. There are things that happen to me, and I just I just want to get even, right? And I say this, I know some of you are like this. Sometimes you just want to get even with people. Like, you just want to be like, listen, you fuck with me, I'm gonna fuck with you, right? Um, and that's in those times I have to come back to the bodhicitta, right? Coming back to the compassion, coming back to the wisdom, and letting that hold me in those moments, right? Instead of making those choices to want other people to hurt as much as me. Um, we have to be very careful, about. We don't talk enough about intentions, unfortunately, but intentions can drive a lot of powerful practice, even for those of us who may not consider ourselves, talented, you know, in in spells and hexes and everything. You don't have to study anything to do a hex, right? To do a spell. Like, it's about intention. It's about hate. It's about aversion, right? It's about the absence of compassion and love in a moment, and what that absence actually drives us to do, to hurt ourselves and to hurt others. You know, that mental space, right? That's created with the absence of love and compassion. Of course, that's also the absence of bodhicitta. How that invites, really draws certain energies around us. Certain not so benevolent energies. And those energies, in that space, we can direct, right? You know, I come from a culture and an upbringing, and I also chose this path, this kind of Tibetan Buddhist tantric path, that's also very superstitious. So I grew up superstitious. I'm in this tradition that's very superstitious for good reason, right? Because there's an understanding from very early on in my life. I knew I understood that in this ecosystem that we're a part of, this ecosystem of living in, the seen world and unseen world, there were beings that were malicious, right? There are living beings that are malicious. There were unseen beings that are malicious. Some of us have gone through that, you know. Um, so I knew that early on. So I was always a believer in protection, right? And at this point in my life, I protect myself through this work of bodhicitta. The bodhicitta helps me to figure out what I need, not just for myself, but for others. When you're beginning to center both your needs and the needs of others, it becomes like a negotiation, right? Right. And I've talked about this before. You know, we're negotiating so all of our needs are met. But bodhicitta helps me to always move through the world and say, everyone has needs, right? I deserve to have my needs met. You deserve to have your needs met. How can I become an agent of getting all of our needs met? Which also is the root of really good sex as well. That's the path of like healing a lot of our trauma around sexuality. It's training in that perspective. It's like how do I create partnerships, relationships where all of our needs are being met? Not just mine, not just my partners, but everyone's needs. I feel like I've said enough. No. Um, I want to I want to actually not get out of here tonight without just doing just a little bit of practice. I want to just do a little bit of grounding practice for us. And maybe just teach a really short protection practice if people would be into that. And before we get into the practice, I really, if you're, let's see, if you're just kind of like really needing more light, more fluidity, more mental kind of movement in your life, I would just suggest investing in, they're not too expensive, just like a clear stone, like a Lemurian crystal, something like that, just like a basic clear stone, I think that would be really useful um, um, to kind of have. And it helps to also purify, cleanse energy in your physical space. And it's nice to use as an object or an anchor for meditation, when you're practicing too, which I often do. What else before we practice? I just want to just offer just a really basic practice around just using bodhicitta. We've done this in Medicine Buddha different ways too. If you join us for Medicine Buddha on Mondays, we've done this several ways, right? But just allowing the energy of bodhicitta to really just radiate from us and protect us. Protecting our home, our blessing, the land, the earth that we're living on. Right? We know we've done this so many different times in practices with me. I just want to do like a short 10-minute practice and then have some space for questions before we end our session tonight. So just to begin, just allowing your body to come into a position that feels appropriate for you. And turning your attention to just developing an intention. Like, why are you practicing? For me, my basic intention is just always to reduce harm by developing clarity. and care. This is why I practice. This is why I always practice, is to reduce harm and develop clarity. So developing that intention for yourself, and always, every time you start a practice, no matter how simple it is, just start with an intention. If your breath is accessible, I invite you just to just shift your attention to the breath, breathing in any way that feels appropriate for you. But right now, I'm breathing, inhaling through my nose, exhaling through my mouth. If you can, allowing the breath to just deepen, to slow down, like just really taking our time to inhale, extending the exhale slowly in and out. Shifting our attention now into our heart centers, beginning to imagine that we're breathing in and out of the heart center. I invite you also to begin to reflect on gratitude. And for me, gratitude is a practice that I can use to enter into this experience of bodhicitta. And beginning to reflect on something or someone that you're grateful for, or a situation that you're grateful for. My general practice is just reflecting on all the ways in which I am a recipient of labor and kindness from so many beings around me. And all this is for my well being. Just I wouldn't be alive in this moment or doing well without people doing things in this moment to support me. From growing my food to making sure I have electricity, um, making sure I get the mail, right, or collecting the trash. Just really thinking about all the labor from beings that you don't even know. Allowing that energy of gratitude to begin to awaken within the heart center. Allowing this energy of gratitude to begin to circulate through your body. And you can imagine the circulation as warm, light light beginning to awaken in the heart center, using the in breath, so breathing into this experience, intensifying this experience of gratitude, and then allowing the out breath to really send this energy through the body. So allowing this energy of gratitude to start taking care of you. And then as this energy of gratitude is circulating through our body, filling our bodies with this energy and this light, I invite you to reflect on, where you're at right now. Just doing a check-in, like how are you doing in terms of well-being? You know, like where's your discomfort, and how are you experiencing discomfort in this moment? And now, turning your attention outward and beginning to reflect on the discomfort of so many people around us, so many beings. Just thinking about how all the ways that others are experiencing discomfort right now. And people that maybe, if you go out, people that you see out, on the sidewalk or at the grocery store or wherever it may be that you're with people, just noticing that. And maybe like you, they don't want to be bound in this discomfort, this suffering. So in this moment, I invite you to link your wishes to be free from your own discomfort with this recognition that other beings want to be free. And beginning to say, may all of us be free from this experience of suffering and discomfort. May all of us be free from violence or from harm. And as you're connecting to that aspiration, that intention, just imagine that this energy that we've been cultivating in the heart center that's spreading out throughout the body, imagine that becomes even more intense. That energy begins to actually radiate from our bodies in the form of white light. And it's okay if you're not seeing anything or feeling anything, just doing whatever you can just to move along, with the visualization and doing as much of this arousing of gratitude and bodhicitta as possible. But if you are able to imagine light and radiance, just imagine that the body begins to radiate this light. And this light begins to create really this force field around us. Like this barrier of soft, white, brilliant light. Make it pretty spacious, so it's like, it should be a little further than arm's length if you're really visualizing this barrier that extends out just barely past our fingertips, just comes around us. And this is a space where we've cleared negative energy, negative influences. And we begin to imagine that this barrier, is a barrier that keeps the negative energy from penetrating. And as we transition out of the practice, I invite you to maintain this shield as much as possible, even especially before you go to sleep. Like just bring your attention back to this meditation of this shield, this field of light around you, protecting you as you sleep, protecting you as you move throughout the day. This shield of light, grounded in gratitude and bodhicitta, really. Gratitude is an energy like bodhicitta that is a protecting energy, it's a vulnerable energy. It's an energy of vulnerability, that energy of openness. But openness helps us to let go of things, particularly things that we don't need. And it helps us to draw into our space positive, benevolent energies and beings. So coming out of the practice, shifting your attention to your seat, noticing the weight of your body, making contact with the seat. letting the weight of the body and the contact with the seat really be an anchor, a grounding experience. Right, now just coming out of the practice, coming back into the space. Just awakening the body through a few simple movements, slow movements, stretching, whatever feels appropriate. Oh, okay. All right, thank you all so much for your practice. Um, if you have any questions, please go ahead and offer those if you have any. If you're just confused, it's fine. I think confusion is a legitimate place to be. Has anyone else been like listening nonstop to the Wu Tang Clan? Is it just me? Because I feel like I'm 16 years old again. I don't know why. Anywho, I think there's some wisdom in the Wu Tang that I need to excavate for future Dharma teaching. Like sometimes, like 90s hip hop. I mean, not like stupid mainstream 90s hip hop, but like real like 90s like conscious like hip hop. It's the only thing that gets it done. The only thing that gets it done. Oh, the Tao of Wu, yeah. Um, well, they're all into meditation. Um, like all like most of them, they're like, which is that's a whole other history of like some of the people that we love to think about and to read, and some of our like role models, and it's just to hear about their connection to spiritual practice. That's been one of my um, kind of aspirations. um, I would love to have this, this platform or a program or whatever, where I like talk to, like, just, I don't know, artists, musicians, celebrities who are, about like spiritual practice, um, or meditation. Like, I would love to do that. I may be doing that. Who knows? Who knows what I'm working on, um, behind the scenes? But yeah, I think it's fascinating. For all of you who were with Muktananda and Guru, um, and Guru Guruji, what's her name? Anyway, those of you who are older, who were with Muktananda back in the day, all the people who, like, was with, like, Muktananda and that whole movement in California, and Guru Maya. Well, of course, Muktananda being first, and then Guru Maya. Fascinating, real fascinating history. Raza, yeah. There's a lot of hip hop, people in the hip hop field industry have been exploring meditation. Russell Simmons has a, like, I don't know, a meditation something album, whatever. Um, Dharma and hip hop is a vastly unexplored subject. There's many vastly unexplored subjects. Um, Hip hop and Dharma. Okay. Oh, there was a question. I'm sorry. It's like reminiscing about 90s hip hop. So, could you speak a little more on the differences between how we can be in relationship with the more mundane spirits out there versus wisdom deities, Dharmapalas, etc.? Yeah. Well, when we talk about more of the wisdom deities, Dharmapalas, and Dharmapalas means Dharma protectors. Um, Dharma protectors are beings who, they're committed to the protection of the Dharma, but they're also committed to getting the resources we need to practice. So that's the Dharmapala deities. I think the one unifying practice is that of compassion, right? It's again deeply reflecting on the ecosystem that we're existing in, right? That we're, of course, another word for ecosystem in Buddha Dharma is, of course, interrelatedness or interdependence. So that's the ecosystem, that we're impacting beings around us, regardless of if we know that or not. Um, so offering this kind of compassion and saying that, yeah, I may be in this form realm, but I still have an impact in the realm, in the formless realm, right? But we know with deities, with wisdom deities, Dharmapalas, that there's a commitment to bodhicitta, to freedom, to liberation, right? So we know that. So there's a kind of vulnerability you can really enter into with these beings. When we're talking about the more mundane spirits, it's mundane spirits. It's like being in a relationship with any other mundane being, with any other person. It's like I have to have boundaries, right? I want to acknowledge you. I want to, know that you're there, and I want to help you, like I want to help any other being, right? But I also have to have boundaries because you don't necessarily have my best, like, you don't necessarily want the best for me. You know, it's not always, but I have to take into account that you may want to harm me or to hurt me. So I set boundaries. So this practice that we did tonight is one of those boundary settings. Another boundary thing with mundane spirits is like just being very clear about what the boundaries are. Literally just saying, you know, what the boundaries are. If that doesn't work, there are other means to work with mundane spirits who are crossing boundaries. And of course, in Tibetan Buddhism and Tantra traditions, we have many practices and rituals to work with that kind of boundary crossing. You know, but always the commitment for me. If you want to benefit me, if you're here as a benevolent spirit energy, if you're not going to get in the way of liberatory work, if you're trying to get free yourself, then fine. Let's do this. Let's be in a relationship. Let's figure out how to benefit one another. But if you're not into that, you have to do something else. You have to go somewhere else. That's the rule. You know. If you need help, that's one thing. If you're just trying to create, nonsense, then that's going to be something else that we're going to have to deal with. Okay, so I think that's it. Thank you all so much for your practice, your time tonight. I promise you that on the website we're going to get the calendar up for who's doing what starting next week. I've just kind of been behind on everything in life, as I always am. So thank you all. Thank you to all those who are new in our space tonight. Please continue to be a part of our programming. Also, I dedicate our practice tonight first to the safety, the well-being of Lama Justin, who is just in the middle of his first week of his 49-day retreat. That whatever light that we've generated, I dedicate to bringing light, stability, groundedness to his practice right now. I also dedicate the merit of our time together to the liberation of all beings and all phenomena, that we all may remember and return back to our most essential natures and expressions. So thank you all so much for being here, and if I don't see you before, please join us on Monday nights for Medicine Buddha practice. Okay, and also come back. We have the recording of this session, so you can always come back and look at the recording. Okay, all right, thank you everyone. Please be well, please be safe, please remember to protect yourselves and ground yourself in the practice of bodhicitta. Okay, thank you.